Oh,
There you go.
my man!
How are you?
What is going on? Is this the lab? Is this where it all takes place,
I
Josh?
this is it. Yes, this is where everything happens. Let me adjust this a little better. That's better. Yes, this is my office in Los Angeles. Because we're not going into the office now in Universal City, so I've been working out of here for many months now.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a nice guy because you respond to all my emails, which is crazy because I'm supposed to be a media pro, but I'm actually just a fan.
Right. You dropped everything to come to CrimeCon last year,
I did.
and
I did, and you got me
and
in.
you would have and you would have been there and you would have been there this year if it had actually
You're
happened.
darn right I would have. For the people who have not been to CrimeCon, how do you, these are true crime people watching right now. Would you describe CrimeCon to them?
It's the annual convention of true crime fans and everybody in the true crime business.
Yeah.
And it's steadily grown every year. It's been on 4 years. This was going to be the fourth one, I think. It was supposed to have happened about a week ago. It's been moved to October. We're all kind of hoping that that happens on schedule. But it was like 1,500 people, the first one. And, it was going to be like 5,000 this time.
Yeah.
Um, it's and it's everybody that you pay attention to in the true crime world. I mean, it's us. It's some of our competitors. It's a lot of podcasters. It's a lot of it's authors. People like Nancy Grace, Kelly Sigler, people from all kinds of true crime TV shows, and just a lot of very interested, motivated fans. It's sort of I mean, to me anyway, it's a thrill to meet the people who are watching on the other side of the television set.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often.
I thought I was a big fan, and I thought I had seen every episode until I sat in the audience when you guys did your panel, and you talk about something, and then the lady behind me says, "Oh, that was Murder on Whispery Row, episode 212, original air date, January 3rd of '98."
Yeah,
It's wild.
yeah, no, it's I see it when I'm in an airport and somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, I got to ask you a question. Why didn't the Kansas City cops use luminol at the second crime scene?" I'm like, "Yeah, which one was that?" They know. I mean, they know. They know the episode. I'm like, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. This is what sort of separates, I think, the Dateline fans from fans of other, dramatic TV shows and things that the people have been watching for years, which is, they don't just see themselves as our fans. They see us all as being sort of on a mission together. It's all about finding the truth, and they want to help. They don't just want to watch. They want to help.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so many questions from people over the last couple of days have reached out to me, but I want to talk about Motive for Murder first, which is this podcast that you're doing
Right.
that has been wildly successful. And the fourth episode came out today, and everybody can, it dropped today. You can listen to it on the iHeartRadio app, which is an obligatory plug, or wherever you get your podcast. So I don't want to give anything away since I've heard all four episodes. How would you set up the story for the people maybe who haven't yet checked it out?
Well, this is a story that's sort of one of the reasons we wanted to do this as a podcast is it kind of doesn't fit the typical Dateline template. There were two murders, not on the same day, not in the same place. They seemed connected, but nobody could kind of figure out what that connection was right away. Certainly law enforcement couldn't figure it out immediately. And the theories that explained the first murder did not explain the second murder. And it wasn't one of the obvious answers. It wasn't the wife, wasn't the husband, it wasn't the boyfriend, and it wasn't about the insurance money. And so all of that made for a sort of a different kind of investigation because they looked at kind of all the obvious people first, and that all went nowhere. And so we're calling this Motive for Murder, but the original title that I thought of was Love, Money, Pride, because I have a friend who's a homicide detective who says that murders can all be classified, or most murders can be classified as love, money, or pride. And that once you figure out what the motivation is, you can usually figure out who it is. And that's part of what police and other investigators in Houston went through starting in 2012, which is when this happened. What was the motivation? Was it was it romantic? Was it about money? Was it about somebody's pride? It took a very long time to sort of get to the end of that road, but they did get to the end of it, and someone's locked up for it now.
And so you guys are rolling out one episode a week. How many total?
6 in total.
Okay.
So the 4th one came out today, and then there'll be another one for the next 2 Thursdays.
So everyone, if you haven't checked it out, go get the first 4 and listen to them. They're really good. You're a tremendous storyteller, and your voice, I feel like your voice, your inflection, the way that you tell the story is what's made you so prolific. That has to also be like when you call for room service or something, people must say, are you the guy?
Are you the guy? They say, are you the guy who ordered a cheeseburger last week? Yeah, because you sound like the same guy. Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's fun. It's weird that I occasionally do get recognized for my voice, because when I began my broadcasting career many years ago, I was working for a different network, which I will not identify.
Okay.
I'll just give you the initials. It was ABC.
Okay, don't tell any. Right, people can figure that out. Yeah, on their own. Yeah.
And they spent, when I was a brand new reporter there, they spent a ton of money sending me to this very expensive and very well-regarded voice coach in New York to try to get me to sound like every other broadcaster. And I certainly tried very hard, but I couldn't do it. This is the voice I went in with. This is the voice I left with. I was not a success in the voice coaching world.
Is that the secret? I mean, 25 years of this show, Dateline NBC, and I know that it was sort of a news magazine maybe in its infancy, and then it turns into, really now you guys are dedicated to true crime. I mean, you guys are pop culture. I mean, it's a noun, it's a verb at this point, you know.
Yeah, I did not see that coming. I mean, yeah, Dateline was just a regular general interest news magazine for the first 10 years I was here, which was from 1995 to 2005. And that's when we started doing true crime. I didn't even really want to do the crime stories at the beginning, but it was clear that that's the direction we were going in. So I did one, and then I kind of liked it, because ultimately reporting is reporting, writing is writing, interviewing is interviewing, and telling somebody's story is, you know, why we all get into this. And one of the great things about sort of the way that we do this is it kind of allows us to be ourselves a little bit. I mean, a Josh story sounds a little different from a Keith story, which sounds a little different from a Dennis story and an Andrea story. And that's fun. And that's something that you don't get on the regular evening news, is a little difference in the way people do it.
Sure. And I may have heard it today in episode 4 of Motive for Murder, but there's always that moment in the show where you have to give the piece, the clue that might be the answer, but yet your objective is to keep people for 60 minutes. I don't think people realize that about broadcasters. You know, when we tell stories, we're supposed to get people to hear the whole story, start to finish. Right. In order to not give it out too soon or give too much information, do you guys write the stories back to front, or how do you do it?
I mean, by now we've done it so many times that sort of it would be hard for me to write a story now that didn't have the sort of basic Dateline template. I mean, we don't begin by saying, look, here's the story of a guy who was accused of killing his wife, but it turned out she was having an affair with the next door neighbor, and that's who did it, right? Now stick around for the next hour and 58 minutes. Yeah. No, we say, Bill and Mary had a happy marriage. And then one day Mary didn't come home, and then they found her body, and then Bill was the suspect, and it looked like it was him. And now you're into the story, and now you've learned a little bit about the backstory of this. I mean, we're not choosing the bloodiest crimes. We're not choosing the scariest or most horrific crimes, because there's plenty of stuff out there that's like so terrible to cover that people just change the channel. I mean, most people are not the victim of violent crime in their lifetimes, but everybody's been in a relationship that didn't work the way it was supposed to. And Dateline is frequently the stories of relationships that really didn't work and what people did as a result of that, some of which is just impossible to understand, that people do these things to someone that they at one time loved, somebody who might be the mother or father of their children. That's, I think, what keeps people watching. And we always kind of draw a line between the storytelling and the story. It's fun to sort of lead people around corners, so we're maybe not telling you that this guy was arrested for exactly this kind of crime 10 years ago. We might not let you know that for another half hour, but eventually, like, we're bound by the truth. If it happened, we're going to disclose
Sure.
that. We're not going to say somebody was a suspect if they weren't. But we can sort of live in the narrative of the investigation for a while. That's kind of fun. But on the other side of the storytelling is the actual story, which is what happened to these people. It's almost always the worst thing that happened to somebody in their lifetime. That's not fun. That's always like deadly serious. And so when Dennis and Keith and Andrea and I are telling these stories, it's always like with that in mind. Like there's two parts to it. There's the part where you're maybe not disclosing everything, and maybe you're winking at the audience a little bit, like you kind of know maybe we're not telling you everything. But the other side of it is a terrible story, and that has to be told pretty much in its entirety.
Yeah. You talk about these unimaginable things. What comes to mind in 25 years and time before that reporting of some of the most ridiculous things? I mean, just like, are you serious?
I mean, look, there's there was this guy in San Diego who was accused of trying to kill his wife with a pipe bomb, and he, denied knowing anything about it. And then a search of his browsing history at the office, not at home. And of course, he was like a church deacon,
Right.
But yeah, yeah, it's always like somebody like
Denounces this kind of behavior
rarely,
and
rarely the scariest
right.
guy, or the scariest woman. It's always somebody who's like got some other persona. So his browsing history at work was revealed he'd been on a website called like How to Kill Your Wife with a Pipe Bomb.
I'm sorry, it's not funny, but
yeah. No, but I mean, like, and then we interviewed him in the lockup, through glass, and he had a whole explanation of how, as they often do, this was not his fault. He didn't have anything to do with it. Other people were pulling their cars up or their RVs up outside his business, and they were surfing his Wi-Fi.
Naturally.
And that's how those searches got on his computer, even though that's not really the way computer searches work, but okay. And then he told us that if we could just find a guy who it was named like Injun Joe. He was like a local.
Someone just put that in the comments. Someone seen this, yeah.
Yeah, and said, can deadly intent, yes. And I think that's what it was called. The titles are the only parts of these that I don't play any role in writing, so I don't always know exactly what the title was. So he said if we just find Injun Joe, then we would get to the bottom of this. Well, what he didn't know was that we'd already heard this story. It filtered out through defense attorneys and prosecutors and the cops. And so we'd gone looking for Injun Joe earlier that day, and we found him in like 9 minutes and 38 seconds. I mean, like it really didn't take very long. And we found him and interviewed him, and Injun Joe was like, I don't know what he's talking about. I don't have anything to do with him or his Wi-Fi or being on that website. And, like, there's nothing to it. So then we sort of, we sort of revealed that while we were doing the interview. And I also said to him something that I frequently want to say to some of these people when they're locked up, which is, why didn't you just get a divorce?
Right.
Get a divorce. Because if you had, your wife would hate you like she does now. Your kids would have renounced you the way they have now, but you wouldn't be in here.
Right. But see, somehow they thought maybe they'd wind up with more money, I interviewed one guy, not the same guy, different guy in a different part of the country, who seriously thought that he would have a better chance with women if he were a widower as opposed to a divorced guy. If he sort of made that calculation, and that's what got him locked up. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's almost funny. On another, it's like horribly tragic, and it's numbing sometimes. And it's like somebody thought of that. I mean, he didn't read that. Somebody made that calculation. Like, yeah, this is the way to go. This is the way out of this. Right. Yeah. If people are just tuning in, Josh Mankiewicz, Dateline NBC, Motive for Murder is the podcast. 4th episode is out right now. You can download all 4, check them out. It's very good. If you love Dateline, if you love some of these other podcasts that are following one singular story, but in a phase of episodes, that's what this does and does it really well. I've joked with you about this before in person, but what makes me laugh is when you're interviewing the person who may have done it, and the way that I know they did it is because they might be wearing like a button down, but you guys are doing your damnedest to blur out the bars.
Well, we spend a lot of time trying to discuss. I mean, sometimes when you're interviewing the guy and he's in handcuffs, or there's a pane of glass between me and the guy we're interviewing, there's not a lot of disguising that, and then they're going to go. But sometimes, depending on which correctional institution you're dealing with, they will let you dress the guy in normal clothes. Frequently, some of these people have no regular clothes, which they would wear to a court appearance.
Okay.
And so they're allowed to put that on. One time we were in some prison, and they said, well, the guy can't take his coverall off, but he can pull it down to his waist. And he was wearing a T-shirt underneath, a white T-shirt. So then we went to Banana Republic that day. We bought an extra large dress shirt. We put it on him over his T-shirt, buttoned it up. We lit a couple of candles. We put those behind him. Got like he was in his living room. And so the episode's playing, and he's talking, and I see all the comments on Twitter. And people are like, well, this clearly isn't the guy because he's obviously at home, right? So, and that's part of the storytelling. That's part of the corners we're leading you around. I mean, I did it the other way more recently with a guy in Utah who'd been convicted of killing his wife. Then it turned out the local police department had measured the crime scene incorrectly or written down the wrong numbers. And on the basis of that, his appeal got him a new trial because the medical examiner then changed his finding from homicide to undetermined, because those measurements meant that the story the guy had told actually was plausible instead of what the medical examiner originally thought, which is this can't have happened. So the guy gets a new trial. So now he's had a second trial. This time he gets acquitted. So we're interviewing him after all of this, and I interview him. We interview him against a cinder block wall, and he's wearing a long sleeve white T-shirt, which he said, a thermal T-shirt, which he said they used to wear in the prison there because it's very cold. So he looked like he was in custody. In fact, he wasn't in custody. So we did it the opposite way that time, and that worked, because at the end of the episode, we get to the verdict, and now we go back to the two of us, and I say, okay, hold up your hands. And he holds his hands up, and I say, you're not wearing handcuffs. He's like, nope, I'm free.
Wow.
And that's how we told the audience that he'd been acquitted in that case. Again, that's the sort of fun part of this. The other part of this is telling the story of what happened and the story of the told by the family of that's left behind. Mm-hmm. And there's this idea that somehow when the criminal justice system sort of finishes working its magic and either convicts someone or acquits them or sends them to death row or something, that then you'll be okay. Well, that's a myth.
Now you have to live still with what we're all watching for an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, people like to think that there's something out there called closure. It's pretty much a myth.
Yeah, you mentioned that in Motive for Murder. Do any of these people who were convicted, I mean, your lie detector's got to be so good at this point. Nobody did it. To your point earlier, nobody ever did it. Does anybody ever tell you they didn't do it, and there's part of you that actually believes them?
Yeah, every now and then there's a couple of people over the years that I mean, I don't know whether I did it or not. I could see the case playing out, and I would think I couldn't have voted to convict this guy. I mean, one of the toughest arguments to make if you're a murder defendant is, yes, I'm a liar. Yes, I cheated on my wife, and I lied to her repeatedly, and I lied to my family, and I lied to my friends, and I lied to the people I work with. So yeah, I'm a big liar. I don't tell the truth about intimate details of my life, but I'm not a murderer. I'm not a killer. You can believe me about that part of it. That I'm not lying about. That's a very, very tough argument to make. But sometimes, and that's what gets you convicted, is you are a proven liar about one thing. It's much easier for juries to believe that you may have lied about other things. Sometimes people are only having affairs. Sometimes people are not murderers. But that's a really tough defense to make. And there have been a couple of times when we're covering cases and I'm thinking to myself, this guy's going to get convicted, and the case against him for murder is not nearly as strong as the case against him for being a jerk, a bad guy, a bad husband.
Yeah.
but those things are not crimes.
Yeah. I'm seeing all these comments here. Thanks for all the comments below. A lot of fans of the show tuning in. And a bunch of their questions I have here. This is a really good one.
Yeah.
Are you ever scared talking to these people? I realize there's a crew and probably some guards, but are you ever thinking this is twisted?
Usually by the time I'm sitting across from these guys, they're on their best behavior, as we said. I mean, their message is, I'm do it. I'm not that guy. I don't have anything to do with this. Do I seem like a bad guy? I'm not a bad guy. I'm not a murderer. So usually that's going on. They're trying to persuade me of not just their innocence, but that they're the kind of person that shouldn't even be in here under any circumstance. Every now and then, like, somebody loses their temper because they don't like being challenged. There was a guy not last year, 2 years ago, who started like really yelling at me in the middle of the interview. And there were corrections officers, but they weren't right next to him just because of the way the seating had worked out. They were kind of like out in the hall, and he's shouting at me, big linebacker guy. And I remember thinking to myself, this guy's about to kick my ass. And this is going to be like maybe the most memorable Dateline interview ever, because it's going to end with me taking a beating. And I could see the crew tensing up too. They could feel it too.
Something's coming. Yeah.
And then the guy controlled himself, and he didn't. He got up and walked out, but he didn't try to do anything. And then he actually came back and finished the interview. Disaster averted, because that would have been a very short, painful fight.
Yeah, right. I think the difference between Dateline and the storytelling that you guys do versus maybe some other reporting is that you inject some personality into it, and you push a little bit, and to the point of interviewing these guys in prison. I think sometimes defense attorneys are trying to use you as a tool to do the very thing that you're talking about. Look how good of a guy he is. Look, everybody, for an appeal or something like that. Has there ever been a situation, and I'm not talking about where you asked a question and a lawyer sensed it was going the wrong way. Has there ever been a situation where that completely backfired, and it's like, he basically just confessed? Like, this is the worst thing that could have happened.
I mean, there was a guy a few years ago in Orange County here in California who'd been convicted of a terrible crime he wanted to steal this retired couple's boat, so he took them out for what they thought was a test drive, and then he and a friend overpowered them, made them sign over the title of the boat, and then threw them overboard attached to the anchor. They were still alive.
Oh my God!
So he drowned. It was a horrific story, so horrific that it almost never reruns on Dateline. And his attorney gave him had him available for interviews for all the networks. For us, for 2020, for 48 hours, because he was sort of trying to, he couldn't deny it. He'd been convicted of it. And the way they went was he was going to say, yes, I did it, but and I was there, but it was really the other guy who made me do it. I couldn't stop him. He's bigger than I am. I was afraid of him. And this wasn't my idea. Okay, but it was your idea, because the whole thing from start to finish had been his idea. And he actually hired the other guy very near the time of the crime. The other guy wasn't the brains behind it. You were. So we did the interview in the lockup in Orange County, and I was very tough on him. And he hadn't been available. He hadn't made himself available to police. He hadn't done a police interview. When he got arrested, he invoked and asked for a lawyer and did not speak with police. So and so this was the only opportunity police were getting. They were watching. They told me later, they were like, wow, that was great. That was the interview we would have done. Except they would have pried more of the story out of him to try to convict him. I'm not an agent of police, but I was pretty tough on him. And I don't think, if the idea was that it was going to sort of soften the feeling of the legal system toward him, I don't think it worked.
Yeah.
Sometimes with these, look, you can't turn off the fact that you're like a person, and, some of what these guys do, and it is usually guys, not always, is pretty reprehensible. So we're not just like, on the one hand and on the other hand. But the idea is, if you want to make the argument to me, if you've been convicted or accused of something, and you want to make the argument to me, this isn't me, I'm being framed, the cops have it in for me, my ex-wife's family has it in for me, you got it all wrong. I'll listen to that. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try to poke some holes in it.
Sure.
So you better be ready.
Sure. People are asking in the comments, and it must be hard, but you have all these great stories. Do you have a favorite episode? If you were to be remembered by one episode that, I don't know if you were proudest of it or if it's the best story or your best reporting, can you think of one?
I did a story. I mean, look, no, I can't.
It's got to be hard, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of them over 25 years. I did a story in 2005, right as we were beginning doing crime, about how if you watched network television news in the United States, you would get the feeling that the only missing people in the country were women who were white, blonde, and attractive, because that's the only people who were getting covered. There was a lot on the Lacey Peterson story. There's a lot on Natalie Holloway. Well, most of the missing people in the United States are men, and a much higher percentage of the missing are minority than the population at large. But we weren't covering any of that. And so, I mean, we Dateline, we were as much to blame as anybody else. It was a story not just about what we did, but about what the rest of the news business was doing and who they were focusing on. And I was glad we did that story, because we asked some questions that are still unanswered and still being answered. And I also sort of felt after we did that, at least at NBC, I felt the ship of state turn a little bit. I mean, we stopped doing as much of that. And that's good. We started covering, people who don't only look like a particular kind of person.
I heard you say in Motive for Murder, which is the podcast, 4 episodes for everyone to download, available now. I heard you talk about, because one of the questions was, where do you get the stories? And you mentioned in the podcast that you just have so many contacts, the Dateline institution at this point, and the hosts themselves, the reporters, have so many contacts. I mean, is it primarily defense attorneys or prosecutors, or where do you get them?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're really lucky because now we've been around for so long, and we're sort of thought of as the true crime original, and that's a brand. And so we hear from prosecutors, from cops, from defense attorneys, from local stations around the country. They call us and say, "This just happened in our neck of the woods, and you should." We don't know how it's going to come out, but it looks like something you're going to want to do eventually. And then we start making calls on it. We also have split up the country into a number of different regions, and we have different producers assigned to reading the newspapers and keeping up on the news in each of those regions. So if the answer is yes, there is somebody who reads all the Florida papers every day.
You could do a whole TV show on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, all right. I mean, first of all, how is there not a TV show now called Florida? Right? I mean,
and why is it Florida, by the way? Because it's always Florida.
I don't know. I mean, I've said this before. We tease them a lot, but the truth is, like, without Texas and Florida, we'd be off the air, I mean, I don't know why, but is there something in the water down there? I don't know what happens, but man, you want a weird story, odds are it's happening in Florida. And I've done a few of them, and there are plenty of them to do.
Do they assign them to you guys based on any particular, is there any sort of criteria where you would get one versus Keith versus Andrea?
Usually it's whoever is available at a particular time. A lot of times they'll call me and say, can you go to, Kansas City next week because this trial is ending? I'm like, I'd love to, but I'm already going to be in Ohio. They're like, okay, I'll call, whoever's next on the list. I mean, that happens. It's usually a case of who has sort of a hole in their schedule. Because right now I'm on like 6 or 7 things, and I don't know which one we're going to end up doing first when the Iron Curtain lifts and we can all sort of start traveling and moving around the country. In the early stages, we're going to start trying to do stuff remotely. Interviews like this, which is, not ideal. It's better if you can face the person that you're interviewing. But I mean, this is going to be the baby step that we begin with, because we gotta get back on the air.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be more stories like this in this particular way, like I'm talking to you. But then eventually we'll be back out and interviewing. But it's like, which of those 7 or 6 is going to be the first, I don't know. There's no way to know.
Yeah. A lot of these questions in the comments have been answered earlier, so when we repost this, people can watch and they can get their answers. Somebody in the comments was wondering if there's a Chicago story of note that you remember in your time reporting. Um, I don't
What have I
remember
done?
watching one that you
I don't
did,
remember.
but
I'm trying to think. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'll have to come back to that. I can't think of a Chicago story. It's been a while. I love Chicago, and I don't go there enough.
yeah, I owe you a ribeye, so we'll have to keep that in
You
mind.
do.
Just tell whoever that person was an asset, just turn on the OWN network, and you'll probably catch that episode and about 40 other ones.
I mean, we've definitely covered stories in Chicago. I'm trying to think of one that I personally have done. It's been a really long time.
How about one that actually touched you? Because I know you're supposed to remove yourself from the story.
Right. Look, I mean, they all do. You can't spend as much time with the people involved in these stories as you do and not have it connect with you in some way. I mean, these are the worst things that happen to these people. And if you're just like, made of granite and, people, get emotional during interviews and you're like, hey, come on, let's finish up here. Well, man, that's not going to work.
Right.
And you're not going to get kind of real interview out of them if you do things like that. On the other hand, when they start crying, you're supposed to have enough emotional distance so that you're not crying along with them, although that's very hard sometimes. What happens is, at least for me, you end up sort of forging some kind of relationship with those people. And not everybody I've interviewed, but a lot of people I've interviewed over the years, like you're still in touch with in some way.
Yeah.
Like check how they're doing and what's new. And, they may see a story and some of them, they end up being the person that tells us about a story that maybe we'll be interested in.
Yeah.
So it's good to keep up with people because, it's they've been through something terrible and you understand it because you heard them tell you about it in sometimes excruciating detail. Dateline interviews frequently take 2, 3, 4 hours. They're not over quickly.
Yeah, that was another question. Was start to finish. I mean, is there any sort of timeline you could put on an average production start to finish on a Dateline episode that we see by the time we see it?
I mean, a couple of months, 2 to 3 months, unless we're rushing it. But, sometimes it's needed beforehand. Sometimes we jam it together in a week, but that requires a lot of extra people. Usually it's just me, a producer, an associate producer, a senior producer who's like the editor of the story, and at least one video editor. And, you can add to any of that and make the whole process go a little faster, but usually 2 to 3 months. And we're also, of course, we're slaves to the trial schedule. If there's a mistrial or a hung jury, or, the judge gets sick and we have to take 2 weeks off, like, we never go until the end. Because first of all, most of the stuff that you want, the 911 call where the person sounds not right, some of the crime scene photos that we can use, some of them are unusable, but some of them you can use. A lot of that stuff, the video of the person being interrogated and maybe changing their story, that's only becomes available at the end of the trial when there's a verdict. Also, you, like other viewers, you don't want the story to end, So what happened to Bill? Well, the trial's next year.
Yeah, we'll find out later.
Yeah, you want to know. He's convicted. He's doing life. Good night.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple more, and then I'll let you get back to your night. Motive for Murder. Everyone needs to check this out. And I'm not one to promote anything but what I do as being good. That's not true. Well, maybe it's not. Motive for Murder. It's on wherever you can get podcasts, and it's good. And the 4th episode dropped today, and you're the host. And if you love Dateline and his signature style, Josh, then you're going to love this, and it's really well done. Pop culture wise, you were just on Curb Your Enthusiasm. How did that happen? What was the Larry David experience like?
I got called at the last minute and asked to do it, and I was. It was Sunday night, and my boss called from New York, and she said, "Do you want to be on Curb Your Enthusiasm?" And I said, I would love to, but I have like 2 scripts that I'm working on, and I got to travel on Wednesday. It was then Sunday night. And so I'm going to have to say no. And she said, yeah, I phrased that incorrectly. I'm like, oh, I got it. Yes, I'll be there. Sure. So So the next morning, there I was. And it's like at 6 a.m., like 7 hours after I get that phone call, 6 hours, I was getting up and going to this set here in Los Angeles. And, it's all improv. I don't know if everybody knows that. I'm sure you do. But I mean, there's no lines. They just tell you what happens in the scene. Like, you're interviewing Larry about this. Okay, ready? Go.
Oh, see, I didn't know
And
that.
you're like, whoa, whoa.
I didn't know that.
Then you're like,
No.
whoa. No, it's all those scenes with all those people. They know where it starts and they know where it stops. I mean, they know you got to get to, Larry is leaving in a huff because he's insulted about something you said. But so much of what happens in there is just the improv skills of the people you see on that show. Those people are real actors. I'm not. They're great at improv. I'm not. I've never done that before. Okay, somebody made the point that a Dateline interview is a little bit like improv.
I would say so. Yeah.
That's true. Okay. Maybe that's a point in their favor. But like, I've never done anything like that before. And so they bring me out there and I'm filling in I'm filling in for Lester. That was Lester was supposed to do it. And then he got pulled away to do actual breaking news. And I was in LA and they're like, okay, it's you. So I went out there, I did it. And I show up and I'm nervous as hell. And they put a little makeup on me and they're like, all right, stand here. And then they bring out Sean Penn and they're like, okay, here's your scene partner. And I'm thinking like, that's Sean Penn, right? Right? And he's like, how you doing? I'm like, okay, yeah. And then we do a scene together and we did it like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 times. And they come out, Larry and his executive producer, who's like together. They like direct you and tell you, they're like, this part worked. Lean this way a little bit. When you're talking, look at this. And like twice during that scene, I burst out laughing because again, I don't do this for a living. But fortunately, they were able to cut around that. You can't tell that I just nearly screwed everything up. So I shot for a couple of days. Did some scenes with Sean Penn. It was very nice. Did some scenes with Jonah Hill at a different time. And then did a bunch of scenes with Larry. And the only big secret I can give you from Curb Your Enthusiasm is Larry's not crazy or neurotic or difficult in real life. He's actually a very nice guy.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I may have guessed that he was more similar to what you see on TV than.
Right. That's what you think that's him. But at least when he's working, he's not like that. And all the people on the show clearly liked him, like the behind the scenes people. I always pay attention to that.
Josh, you're a gentleman. You respond to many tweets on Twitter from people, which is amazing. You really keep up with fans. Like I said, I have one more question for you, but I just have to say, you're very kind to me, and I'm just a fan. I might be in the media.
You're the greatest. What are you talking
we
about?
might have this radio show, but like, I'm really just geeking out.
We love you. What are you talking about? You're the guy that came down in the middle of the night to go to CrimeCon. I don't know if people know this, but like he emails me and he's like, I'm a radio host in Chicago. I'm like, okay. He goes, and I want to come to Chicago, but I want to come to CrimeCon, which was in Nashville.
It was,
but I'm only going to go.
It was New Orleans.
No, that was the next year,
Yeah.
right? But I'm only going to come if we can hang out. I'm like, okay.
I couldn't believe it.
So yeah, and then I'm like, all right, come on. So he came. And then we had a great time. So yeah. Look, I mean, everything you've done for us and having me on here, it's the greatest. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, no! I think you were the number one podcast. I think you are every week. So but nonetheless.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. I mean, we announced Motive for Murder on a Thursday, and by Sunday night, it was the number one podcast in America. Now, that's not me. That's Dateline. That is some significant brand loyalty. That is an army of fans out there who watch and they know what's coming. And people signed up for it. It was great. And doing the podcast has been a lot of fun. It's different from doing the TV broadcast.
Well,
it's different.
You're being humble, but maybe the first episode being number one isn't you, but then 2, 3, and 4, that then becomes you.
I'm glad people are out there listening. So listen to all of them, and let me know what you think.
People are commenting that you need to do some sort of intro for our radio show in Chicago, and I know exactly what I want you to do, but what I'm going to do is send you a few points, and then I need the Josh. I mean, I couldn't begin to write it the way that you would. So I'm just going to send you a couple of points, and you do it. But here's the question, the one I've been waiting to ask. I wish I could tell you that it was my question. My executive producer, Kalen, came up with this, and it's brilliant. After all your experience, all your wisdom, you've done all these stories. Josh, if you were going to kill somebody, how would you do it?
I would not kill somebody.
Okay.
I mean, look, you cannot reliably get away with it. We don't do a lot of stories about serial killers. We don't do a lot of stories about like hired hitmen. We do stories generally about people who have never killed before. And yeah,
sometimes you can tell.
yeah. If you do it, like you think you've thought of everything, you haven't thought of everything. I mean, you leave your phone at home during the time you committed the murder. Police are going to look at that and they'd be like, wow, those are the 2.5 hours, the only 2.5 hours in the last 9 years that you weren't sending a text every 45 seconds. You're dark for a little while. Gee, I wonder what you were doing. I mean, that's how the guy who was yelling at me got caught. So, I mean, there's, do not. It's harder than you think. It's not like a TV show, right? You won't fool the cops. They're good at it. They'll figure it out. They know when you're lying usually.
I thought maybe you'd say ice pick.
The people who get away with murder are almost always super lucky in some way that you can't predict. Like the evidence gets lost, or they drop it in the lab, and it spills and you can't test it. I mean, if you commit murder, odds are you're going to get caught.
I said ice pick. I meant icicle. Someone just corrected me. Icicle is what I meant.
And then it melts, right?
No fingerprints.
Right.
But to your point, I probably would have then prior Googled where are icicles growing currently, or where are they forming
that I could kill someone with. Yes, exactly.
That's the thing is I feel like I would do everything perfectly except for the one obvious thing that I didn't.
Well, that will get you on Dateline, missing that one thing. So
I don't want to be on. I want to watch Dateline. I don't want to be on it.
Better to watch it than to be on it.
Josh, thank you for your time. You probably have better things to do. Motive for Murder, though, is this podcast. Fourth episode dropped today. Really, though, if you're watching this, it's because you love Dateline, and you will love this too. 2 more episodes to go. They're not really very long either, maybe 20, 25 minutes on average each. So
yeah, they're not long. The last one's longer, but most of them, they're under half an hour.
Yeah. And if some of the other ones I've listened to that I like a lot, the Serial and some of the other ones, really well done. And this is up there, right there with all of those, just as good, just as compelling. And in fact, even when I thought I knew what was going to happen today, I don't know what's going to happen. So
good.
I'm going to have to.
Well, we're doing it right.
You hooked me too, man.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Well, thank you. Keep in touch.
Thank you for well, I'll talk to you, but thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure, and thanks to everyone who watched this too. And yeah, we'll be in touch, but be safe, be well too, Josh.
You too. Be careful out there, everybody.
All right, take care.